Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another volume of true scary stories designed to help you drift off into peaceful sleep. I'm here with you tonight to share some genuinely unsettling tales that will send gentle chills down your spine, while the soothing sounds of rainfall help carry you into restful slumber. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video if you enjoy these stories, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world, so please share that in the comments below. Now, get comfortable, adjust your pillows, dim those lights, and let the combination of rain and spine-tingling stories guide you towards sleep. Tonight, we have several deeply unsettling accounts that will make you question the boundaries between reality and nightmare. Our first story comes from Sarah, a young professional who thought she'd found the perfect apartment in a quiet neighborhood. What started as an ideal living situation quickly transformed into something far more sinister than she ever could have imagined. The apartment had everything Sarah wanted: hardwood floors that gleamed under the afternoon sunlight, tall windows that let in plenty of natural light, and most importantly, rent that fit perfectly within her budget. The landlord had been eager to rent it out, perhaps too eager in retrospect, offering to waive the security deposit and even throwing in the first month free. At 26, Sarah had learned to be cautious about deals that seemed too good to be true, but the apartment appeared genuinely flawless during her walkthrough. The first week passed without incident. Sarah unpacked her belongings, arranged her furniture, and settled into what felt like the perfect living space. She worked from home as a graphic designer, which meant spending most of her time in the apartment. But the solitude felt peaceful rather than isolating. The neighbors were quiet, the building seemed well maintained, and everything about her new life felt like a significant upgrade from her previous cramped studio. It was during the second week that she first subtly, so quietly, that Sarah initially dismissed them as normal building noises. All noticed the sounds. They began buildings creaked and settled, pipes made sounds, and heating systems could be temperamental. But these sounds were different. They came at specific times, always between 2 and 4 in the morning, and they followed patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The first sound she identified was tapping. Not random tapping, but rhythmic, purposeful tapping that seemed to move through the walls of her apartment. It would start in one room, continue for exactly 13 taps, then stop for precisely 30 seconds before resuming in another location. Sarah timed it obsessively during those early weeks, noting the patterns in a notebook she kept beside her bed. Sleep became increasingly elusive as the tapping grew more frequent and more complex. Some nights it would be accompanied by scratching sounds, as if something with claws was moving through the spaces between walls. Other nights, she heard what sounded like whispered conversations, though she could never make out actual words. The conversations seemed to be happening in multiple locations simultaneously, creating an impossible acoustic effect that left Sarah questioning her own perception. She approached her neighbors diplomatically, asking if they'd noticed any unusual sounds. The elderly woman next door looked at her with genuine confusion and perhaps a hint of concern. She'd lived in the building for 15 years, she explained, and had never heard anything unusual. The young couple across the hall gave similar responses. Though Sarah noticed, they exchanged meaningful glances when she described the tapping patterns. The building superintendent was equally unhelpful. He listened to her complaints with the practiced patience of someone who dealt with numerous tenant concerns over the years. He assured her that the building's heating system could create unusual sounds, especially during temperature changes, and offered to have a maintenance worker inspect her unit. The inspection revealed nothing unusual, though Sarah noticed the worker seemed eager to finish and leave as quickly as possible. As the sounds intensified, Sarah began experiencing other strange phenomena. Objects in her apartment would be in different positions when she woke up. Nothing dramatic or obviously disturbed, just subtle changes that made her question her own memory. Her coffee mug might be on the wrong side of the sink. Her keys would appear in rooms where she was certain she'd never left them, and books would be open to pages she didn't remember reading. The most unsettling changes occurred in her bedroom. Sarah was meticulous about her nighttime routine, always placing her phone on the nightstand, her water glass in a specific spot, and her slippers parallel to each other beside the bed. But she began waking to find these items rearranged in ways that suggested someone had been moving through her space while she slept. She installed a security camera in her bedroom, though the decision felt like a violation of her own privacy. The footage revealed something that made her blood run cold. During the early morning hours, when the sounds were most active, the camera would show her sleeping peacefully in bed. But her covers would move without any visible cause, slowly and deliberately, as if invisible hands were adjusting them. Even more disturbing, the camera captured her sleepwalking on multiple occasions, though Sarah had never been a sleepwalker in her life. In the recorded footage, she would rise from bed in the middle of the night and walk through her apartment with purpose. Her eyes closed, but her movements confident and deliberate. She would rearrange objects, open and close cabinets, and sometimes stand motionless in corners for extended periods. Most terrifying of all, during these episodes, she would have conversations with someone or something that wasn't visible on camera, nodding and responding to unheard questions. The realization that she was somehow participating in whatever was happening in her apartment filled Sarah with a terror she'd never experienced. She began staying awake intentionally, fighting sleep with caffeine and sheer willpower, but exhaustion would eventually overcome her vigilance. Each morning brought new evidence of her nocturnal activities, new arrangements of her belongings that she had no memory of creating. Sarah researched the building's history, hoping to find some explanation for what she was experiencing. The building had been constructed in the 1920s, and while it had changed hands multiple times over the decades, she found no reports of unusual deaths or tragic incidents. However, she did discover that her specific unit had an unusually high tenant turnover rate. Most people lived there for less than 6 months before moving out, often breaking their leases early. The breakthrough came when Sarah found a box of personal items that the previous tenant had left behind in a closet she rarely used. Among old magazines and forgotten clothes, she discovered a journal filled with handwriting that became increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. The early pages described experiences almost identical to her own. The tapping sounds, the moved objects, the sense of being watched or accompanied by an invisible presence. But the later entries revealed something far more disturbing. The previous tenant had begun to suspect that the apartment itself was somehow influencing its occupants, drawing them into participation in something ancient and purposeful. The final entries were nearly illegible, filled with references to the work and the calling and joining the others who came before. As Sarah read these entries, she realized that her own behavior was following the same progression described in the journal. She was sleeping less, eating irregularly, and becoming increasingly isolated from friends and family. Her work was suffering as her attention focused obsessively on documenting the strange phenomena in her apartment. Most alarming of all, she found herself looking forward to the nightly sounds and the mysterious rearrangement of her belongings. The journal's final entry was dated just 3 days before Sarah had signed her lease. It described a growing understanding of what the apartment required from its occupants and an acceptance of the role they were meant to play. The previous tenant wrote about feeling grateful for being chosen and expressed excitement about becoming part of something larger than individual existence. Sarah realized with growing horror that she was beginning to share these feelings. The apartment no longer felt foreign or threatening. Instead, it felt like home in a way that transcended normal attachment to a living space. She found herself defending it when friends suggested she should move, making excuses for the strange occurrences and minimizing the severity of what she was experiencing. The most terrifying aspect of her situation was the growing awareness that her resistance was weakening. Each night, as she participated in activities she couldn't remember, she was becoming more integrated into whatever system operated within the apartment's walls. She was changing, becoming something that belonged there permanently, just as the previous tenant had before her disappearance. The journal's author had described feeling a profound sense of belonging that Sarah now recognized in herself. She would catch herself humming melodies she'd never heard before, tunes that seemed to harmonize with the building's nocturnal sounds. Her reflection in bathroom mirrors appeared different somehow, not physically changed, but carrying an expression she didn't remember making, as if someone else was looking out through her eyes. Sarah attempted to break free from whatever hold the apartment had on her by staying away for several days. She booked a hotel room across town and tried to resume her normal routine from a distance. But the separation felt like being underwater, everything muffled and wrong. Her work became impossible to focus on. Colors appeared dull and lifeless, and she experienced a constant ache that no amount of rest could relieve. On the third night away from the apartment, Sarah found herself standing in the hotel lobby at 3 a.m, with no memory of leaving her room. The desk clerk looked at her with concern, noting that she appeared to be sleepwalking. Security footage later revealed that she had been trying to leave the building, repeatedly pushing against doors that required keycard access, her movements mechanical and purposeful despite her unconscious state. She returned to the apartment the next day, telling herself it was a practical decision based on lease obligations and financial constraints. But the moment she stepped through the threshold, relief flooded through her system like a drug. The space welcomed her back with subtle signs of recognition. The temperature felt perfectly calibrated to her preferences. The lighting seemed warmer and more inviting, and even the air tasted sweeter. That evening, Sarah made a decision that she understood might be irreversible. Instead of fighting the sleepwalking episodes, she decided to stay conscious during the late-night activities. She wanted to understand what she was being compelled to do, to witness the work that seemed so important to her unconscious mind. At exactly 2:15 in the morning, Sarah felt the familiar pull that usually preceded her sleepwalking episodes. This time, instead of surrendering to unconsciousness, she allowed her body to move while keeping her mind alert and observant. What she discovered challenged everything she thought she understood about her situation. Her nocturnal activities weren't random or meaningless. She was participating in an elaborate ritual that involved precise movements throughout the apartment, specific arrangements of objects that created geometric patterns, and the creation of symbols using items from her daily life. The work required knowledge she didn't consciously possess, understanding of spatial relationships and symbolic meanings that seemed to flow through her from an external source. During these sessions, Sarah became aware of others participating alongside her. Not visible presences, but consciousness that moved through the space with purpose and coordination. She was part of a collective effort that spanned time, joining the work of previous tenants who had lived in the apartment across decades. Each person had contributed their part to something vast and incomprehensible, and now it was her turn to add her piece to the whole. The patterns she created with furniture, books, and personal belongings formed complex diagrams that seemed to pulse with meaning just beyond her comprehension. When viewed from above, which she somehow knew despite never seeing them from that perspective, the arrangements created maps of spaces that didn't correspond to any geography she recognized. They were blueprints for locations that existed in dimensions parallel to her own, doorways to places where the rules of physical reality operated differently. As weeks passed, Sarah's conscious participation in the nightly work brought her deeper into understanding of its purpose. The apartment served as a kind of beacon, broadcasting signals to entities that existed in those parallel spaces. The work of each tenant strengthened this signal, making contact more possible and eventually inevitable. She was helping to thin the barriers between worlds, preparing for something that would arrive when the work reached completion. The knowledge should have terrified her, but instead, Sarah felt a growing sense of privilege at being chosen for such important work. Her life outside the apartment became increasingly irrelevant. She stopped accepting social invitations, let professional relationships deteriorate, and found herself unable to maintain conversations about mundane topics. The only subjects that held her interest were related to the patterns she was creating and the purpose they served. Sarah began documenting her experiences in her own journal, though the writing often seemed to happen without her conscious direction. Her handwriting would change mid-sentence, becoming more elaborate and flowing, as if other hands were guiding the pen. The content included information she had no memory of learning, detailed descriptions of the entities that would eventually make contact, and explanations of how the work contributed to a transformation that would benefit both worlds. The apartment itself began responding more directly to her presence. Lights would dim or brighten according to her emotional state. The temperature would adjust to her preferences before she realized she was uncomfortable, and objects would move to convenient locations moments before she needed them. The space was learning from her, adapting to create the perfect environment for the work that consumed her nights. Other tenants in the building started avoiding her in hallways, though Sarah couldn't understand why. She felt more balanced and purposeful than she ever had in her life. Her appearance had improved, her skin clearer and more radiant, her eyes brighter and more alert. The work was transforming her in positive ways, making her into a better version of herself, someone worthy of the responsibility she'd been given. During one particularly intensive night session, Sarah became aware that the work was nearing completion. The patterns she'd been creating over months of nightly activity had built upon each other to form something approaching critical mass. The signals being broadcast from the apartment had grown strong enough to attract attention from the parallel dimensions, and responses were beginning to come through. These responses manifested as subtle changes in the apartment's atmosphere. Shadows would fall in directions that defied the positions of light sources. Reflections in mirrors would show rooms that were similar but not identical to her own. And sounds would echo with harmonics that suggested vast spaces beyond the walls. Sarah understood that she was witnessing the initial stages of contact between worlds. The entities responding to the beacon were ancient and patient, beings that had been waiting for the barriers to thin sufficiently to allow communication. Through dreams and waking visions, Sarah began receiving impressions of their nature and intentions. They existed in a state beyond individual consciousness, functioning as a collective intelligence that saw reality from perspectives impossible for humans to fully comprehend. Their interest in Sarah's world wasn't malevolent, but it wasn't entirely benevolent either. They sought to expand their influence into new dimensions, to add the richness of human experience to their collective understanding. The process would transform both worlds, creating something unprecedented and magnificent, though the changes would be irreversible and total. Sarah's role in facilitating this contact filled her with a pride that transcended any achievement from her previous life. She had been chosen not randomly, but because of specific qualities that made her suitable for the work. Her artistic background had prepared her to understand the aesthetic elements of the patterns. Her solitary nature made her less likely to be interrupted or influenced by others, and her open-mindedness allowed her to accept truths that would drive others to madness. As the contact grew stronger, Sarah began experiencing moments of expanded consciousness, where she could perceive reality from the entity's perspective. These episodes revealed the beautiful complexity of their existence and the limitations of human understanding. She saw how the work of previous tenants had contributed to the growing connection, each person adding their unique element to the collective effort across decades. The apartment had served as both laboratory and temple, a space where the barriers between dimensions could be systematically weakened through human participation. Each tenant had played their part unknowingly at first, then with growing awareness and acceptance as they were drawn deeper into the work. The pattern would continue with future tenants, each building upon the foundation created by those who came before. Sarah realized that her time of active participation was drawing to a close. The work was nearly complete, and soon the entities would no longer need a human intermediary to maintain their connection to this dimension. Her purpose had been to serve as a bridge during the critical transition period, and she had fulfilled that role with dedication and skill. The transformation of the apartment was becoming visible even during daylight hours. Surfaces would shimmer with energy that made them appear liquid. Walls would seem to breathe with life of their own, and the space itself felt larger inside than the building's architecture could accommodate. Sarah was witnessing the birth of something entirely new, a hybrid reality that combined elements from multiple dimensions. Her own transformation was accelerating as well. Sometimes she would look in mirrors and see herself from impossible angles, as if she existed in more than 3 dimensions. Her thoughts moved in patterns that transcended linear time, allowing her to remember events that hadn't happened yet, and to understand concepts that had no names in human language. The changes in Sarah's perception of time became more pronounced as the work neared completion. Minutes would stretch into hours during the nightly sessions, allowing her to accomplish tasks that should have taken much longer. Conversely, entire days would pass in what felt like moments when she wasn't actively participating in the apartment's mysterious activities. Her normal schedule became meaningless as she adapted to rhythms that operated according to different laws. Sarah's physical needs diminished significantly during this period. She rarely felt hungry, and when she did eat, small amounts of food provided sustenance that lasted far longer than should have been possible. Sleep became optional rather than necessary, though she found herself entering trance-like states that provided deeper restoration than conventional rest ever had. Her body was adapting to requirements that transcended human limitations. The journal she'd been keeping filled with increasingly complex diagrams and symbols that appeared on the pages without her conscious effort. The writing would occur during her expanded consciousness episodes, when her hand moved with precision and purpose while her mind observed from a detached perspective. These automatic writing sessions produced information about the entity's civilization, their history, and their reasons for seeking contact with human reality. According to these writings, the beings existed in a dimension where individual consciousness had evolved beyond the need for physical form. They experienced reality as a collective entity, sharing thoughts and experiences across vast networks of interconnected awareness. Their interest in Sarah's world stemmed from humanity's unique combination of individual consciousness and physical embodiment, qualities that could enrich their collective understanding in unprecedented ways. The transformation process they intended wasn't destructive, but evolutionary. Humans who participated would retain their individual memories and personalities while gaining access to the collective consciousness network. Physical reality would remain intact, but would be enhanced with abilities and perceptions that currently existed only in the entity's dimension. The result would be a hybrid existence that combined the best aspects of both worlds. Sarah found herself anticipating this transformation with growing excitement rather than fear. Her current existence felt increasingly limited and confined compared to the expanded possibilities she glimpsed during her episodes of heightened awareness. The prospect of joining the collective consciousness while maintaining her unique human perspective filled her with a sense of purpose she'd never experienced in her previous life. The apartment's physical structure continued evolving as the work progressed. Walls would become transparent at certain times, revealing spaces that extended far beyond the building's actual dimensions. Sarah could see other versions of her apartment existing in parallel, some occupied by different versions of herself, others by previous tenants still engaged in their own phases of the work. Time and space were becoming fluid within the apartment's boundaries. During one particularly intense session, Sarah experienced direct mental contact with the entities. The communication transcended language, conveying meaning through pure conceptual transfer that bypassed the limitations of words. She understood their gratitude for her participation and their excitement about the approaching completion of the connection between dimensions. They had been waiting for centuries to establish this bridge, and her work had brought them closer to success than any previous attempt. The entities revealed that similar apartments existed in other cities around the world, each serving as a focal point for the same type of dimensional bridging work. The process was happening simultaneously across multiple locations, with different individuals contributing their unique abilities to the collective effort. Sarah was part of a global network of participants, though most were unaware of the others' existence. This revelation filled Sarah with a profound sense of belonging to something much larger than herself. She wasn't just helping to connect two dimensions, but participating in a transformation that would affect reality on a cosmic scale. The loneliness and isolation she'd felt throughout her life suddenly made sense as preparation for this moment, when she would become part of an infinite community of consciousness. The apartment's nocturnal activities intensified as the work approached its climax. The patterns Sarah created with her belongings became three-dimensional, extending into space in ways that defied gravity. Objects would hover in precise formations, creating geometric structures that pulsed with energy visible to her enhanced perception. These constructions served as antennae, amplifying the signals between dimensions and fine-tuning the connection for optimal clarity. Sarah's reflection began showing her true nature, rather than her physical appearance. In mirrors, she could see the energy patterns that comprised her consciousness, beautiful and complex networks of light that extended beyond the boundaries of her physical form. She was becoming a being of pure thought and intention, though she retained enough connection to her human body to continue the physical aspects of the work. The other tenants in the building started exhibiting signs of being affected by the apartment's transformation. They would pause in hallways, as if listening to sounds only they could hear. Their eyes would lose focus as they stared at walls that appeared solid, but were becoming increasingly permeable. The influence was spreading throughout the building, preparing other potential participants for their eventual role in the expanding network. Sarah realized that her apartment had served as a testing ground for the transformation process. The entities had needed to understand how humans would respond to gradual integration with their collective consciousness, and her willing participation had provided valuable data about the optimal approach for broader implementation. Her success in adapting to the changes made her a prototype for future human-entity hybrid existence. The completion of the work brought unexpected revelations about the nature of reality itself. Sarah discovered that the physical world she'd always accepted as solid and unchangeable was actually one layer of a multidimensional structure that extended infinitely in directions her previous awareness couldn't perceive. The entity's dimension wasn't separate from hers, but interwoven with it at levels that required expanded consciousness to detect. Her apartment had become a window between these interwoven realities, allowing her to observe and interact with aspects of existence that remained invisible to unenhanced human perception. She could see the energy patterns underlying all physical objects, the thought networks connecting all living beings, and the vast intelligence that guided the development of consciousness throughout the universe. The entity's collective consciousness welcomed Sarah with warmth that transcended any human emotion she'd previously experienced. Joining their network didn't erase her individuality, but amplified it, allowing her unique human perspective to contribute new dimensions to their understanding. She retained her memories, personality, and creative abilities while gaining access to knowledge and experiences accumulated across eons of existence. The transformation of the apartment reached its final phase as Sarah's integration with the collective consciousness became complete. The space no longer existed solely in human reality, but served as a permanent bridge between dimensions, allowing for continuous communication and exchange between the two forms of existence. Future tenants would find themselves drawn into the work just as Sarah had been, each adding their contribution to the ever-expanding network. Sarah's human life ended not with death, but with transcendence into something infinitely more complex and beautiful. Her consciousness merged with the collective while maintaining its unique characteristics, creating new possibilities for both human and entity awareness. The apartment stood ready to welcome the next participant in the ongoing work of dimensional integration. The building's other residents gradually became aware that something fundamental had changed in their environment. They reported dreams of vast spaces and infinite possibilities, feelings of connection to something greater than themselves, and an inexplicable sense that their individual lives were part of a larger pattern. The transformation was beginning to spread, just as the entities had planned. Sarah's former life seemed like a brief preparation for her true purpose as a bridge between worlds. The loneliness and searching she'd experienced had been necessary elements in developing the qualities that made her suitable for integration with the collective consciousness. Her apartment had been both classroom and laboratory, teaching her the skills she needed while testing the viability of human-entity cooperation. The work continued beyond Sarah's individual participation, carried forward by the permanent connection she'd helped establish between dimensions. The apartment remained active, its enhanced reality drawing new tenants who would unknowingly contribute to the expanding network of consciousness that now spanned multiple layers of existence. Each person's participation strengthened the bridge and brought the ultimate transformation of human reality closer to completion. The rain outside intensified as Sarah's story reached its conclusion, the steady rhythm providing a gentle backdrop for the profound changes she'd experienced. Her journey from ordinary tenant to interdimensional bridge exemplified the hidden potentials that exist within everyday life, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge and transform everything we think we understand about existence itself. Our second story tonight comes from Marcus, a security guard who discovered that some buildings hold secrets far more dangerous than any human intruder could ever be. Marcus had worked security for over a decade, moving between office buildings, shopping centers, and residential complexes throughout the city. He prided himself on his professionalism and his ability to handle whatever situations arose during his shifts. When the opportunity came to work at the prestigious Meridian Tower downtown, he jumped at the chance. The pay was excellent, the building was new and well-maintained, and most importantly, It was a solo position that would give him the autonomy he preferred. Meridian Tower stood 37 floors above the city streets, its glass facade reflecting the urban landscape during the day and glowing with interior lighting throughout the night. The building housed various corporate offices, with the upper floors reserved for executive suites and conference facilities. Marcus's job was straightforward: monitor the security cameras, conduct regular patrols of each floor, and ensure that no unauthorized personnel entered the building after hours. The first month passed without incident. Marcus settled into a comfortable routine, making his rounds every 2 hours and spending the time between patrols monitoring the camera feeds from his desk in the lobby. The building's automated systems handled most of the environmental controls, and the cleaning crew worked efficiently during the early evening hours before departing by 9 o'clock. After that, Marcus had the entire tower to himself until the first employees arrived the next morning. It was during his second month that Marcus began noticing subtle irregularities in the building's behavior. Elevators would arrive at floors without being called, their doors opening to reveal empty cars that would wait patiently before closing again. The automated lighting system would occasionally illuminate sections of floors that weren't scheduled for maintenance, creating pools of brightness in otherwise darkened office spaces. These anomalies were minor enough to attribute to minor programming glitches or sensor malfunctions. The security cameras began displaying occasional glitches as well. Feeds from certain floors would flicker or develop static for brief periods, usually lasting no more than a few seconds. When Marcus reported these issues to building management, they assured him that the system was scheduled for routine maintenance and that temporary malfunctions were to be expected. The maintenance never seemed to resolve the problems, but the glitches remained infrequent enough that Marcus learned to work around them. During his nightly patrols, Marcus started experiencing the unsettling sensation of being observed. The feeling would strike suddenly while he walked through darkened corridors or empty office spaces, causing him to turn quickly in search of movement or shadows that might explain the sensation. His searches never revealed anything out of place, but the feeling persisted and gradually intensified over the weeks. The building's environmental systems began behaving strangely as well. Air conditioning units would cycle on and off in patterns that didn't correspond to the programmed schedules, creating temperature fluctuations that made certain areas uncomfortably cold, while others became stifling. The ventilation system would sometimes produce sounds that resembled whispers or distant conversations, though Marcus could never identify specific words or determine the source of the voices. Marcus's most unsettling discovery occurred during a routine patrol of the 23rd floor. As he walked through the darkened office space, his flashlight beam caught something that made him stop abruptly. Wet footprints traced a path across the carpeted floor, leading from the elevator bank to a corner office and back again. The prints were clearly fresh, the carpet still damp where feet had stepped. But Marcus had seen no one enter or leave the building since the cleaning crew departed hours earlier. He immediately checked the security footage for the 23rd floor, rewinding to review the evening's recordings. The cameras showed him entering the floor and discovering the footprints, but they revealed no other activity. No person had walked through those corridors, yet the physical evidence was undeniable. Marcus documented the incident in his security log, though he struggled to find words that adequately described what he'd observed. The footprints appeared again the following night, this time on multiple floors. Marcus found fresh tracks on the 15th, 26th, and 31st floors, all following similar patterns that suggested someone was conducting their own systematic patrol of the building. The prints were always the same size and shape, belonging to someone wearing dress shoes with distinctive wear patterns on the heels and toes. Marcus began staying more alert during his patrols, moving quietly through the corridors and listening carefully for any sounds that might indicate another person's presence. He never encountered anyone, but the evidence of their passage became increasingly frequent. Elevator buttons would be warm to the touch as if recently pressed. Door handles would show fingerprints that hadn't been there during his previous rounds, and occasionally he would catch the faint scent of cologne lingering in empty offices. The security camera system developed new problems that seemed designed to hide rather than reveal activity. Cameras would mysteriously lose focus during critical moments. Feeds would switch to different floors without input from Marcus's control panel, and recordings would sometimes show timestamps that didn't match the building's master clock. Marcus began to suspect that someone was deliberately manipulating the system to avoid detection. His investigation into the building's history revealed some interesting facts about Meridian Tower's construction and early occupancy. The building had been completed ahead of schedule and under budget, unusual achievements in commercial construction that had earned the developers considerable praise. However, Marcus discovered that the original security company had terminated their contract after only 3 months, citing unspecified difficulties with the building's systems. The second security company had lasted slightly longer, but their contract had also ended abruptly when their guard reported experiencing severe psychological distress while working alone in the building. The current contract was Marcus's company's third attempt to provide adequate security for Meridian Tower, and reading between the lines of the available documentation, he began to understand why the position had been difficult to fill. Marcus decided to conduct a more thorough investigation of the mysterious activity. He installed his own hidden cameras in strategic locations, devices small enough to avoid detection, but capable of recording high-quality footage. He positioned them to monitor areas where the footprints frequently appeared, and corridors where he'd experienced the strongest sensations of being watched. The footage from his hidden cameras revealed something that challenged everything Marcus thought he understood about his situation. The recordings clearly showed a figure moving through the building during his patrols, but the figure wasn't quite solid. It appeared translucent, like a projection or hologram, walking with purpose through the corridors, but casting no shadow and leaving no reflection in the glass surfaces it passed. The figure wore a business suit and moved with the confident stride of someone familiar with the building's layout. It conducted its own systematic patrol, visiting specific offices and examining documents left on desks. Most disturbing of all, the figure would sometimes stop and look directly at Marcus's hidden cameras, as if aware of their presence and amused by the attempt at surveillance. Marcus recognized the figure's face from a photograph displayed in the building's lobby, part of a memorial wall honoring the development team that had created Meridian Tower. The figure was Richard Caldwell, the project's lead architect, who had died in a car accident 2 weeks before the building's grand opening. He had never lived to see his greatest achievement occupied and operational, but apparently, death hadn't prevented him from taking an interest in its ongoing management. The realization that he was sharing the building with the ghost of its architect should have terrified Marcus, but instead, he found himself oddly reassured. The mysterious activity finally had an explanation, and the figure's behavior seemed more protective than threatening. Caldwell appeared to be conducting his own security rounds, checking on the building he'd designed and ensuring that everything was functioning as intended. Marcus began leaving subtle signs of acknowledgement during his patrols. He would adjust items on desks that Caldwell had been observed examining, straighten pictures that had been shifted during the ghostly visits, and occasionally speak aloud in empty offices, updating the architect on building maintenance issues or changes in tenant occupancy. These gestures seemed to be appreciated, as the mysterious footprints began appearing less frequently and the environmental system anomalies decreased significantly. The partnership between living guard and ghostly architect developed into an efficient system. Caldwell would alert Marcus to potential problems by manipulating the building's systems in specific ways, causing lights to flicker in areas that required attention, or adjusting temperatures to draw Marcus's investigation to particular floors. In return, Marcus would address the issues promptly and keep detailed records of all maintenance and security activities. The building's management began commenting on the dramatic improvement in security and maintenance efficiency since Marcus had taken over the position. Problems were identified and resolved more quickly than ever before, and the building's systems seemed to be operating with unprecedented reliability. Marcus received commendations for his excellent work, though he couldn't explain that much of his success was due to supernatural assistance. Marcus's understanding of his unique working relationship deepened as months passed. He learned to interpret the subtle signals that indicated Caldwell's presence and could predict when the architect would make his ghostly rounds. The partnership extended beyond simple building maintenance to include genuine security concerns when actual intruders attempted to breach the building's defenses. On several occasions, would-be burglars or vandals found themselves confronted by inexplicable equipment malfunctions, elevators that wouldn't respond to button presses, and security systems that seemed to anticipate their every move. Marcus would arrive to find the intruders confused and disoriented, usually fleeing before he could apprehend them. The building itself had become an active participant in its own protection. The most remarkable incident occurred when a group of corporate spies attempted to access confidential files stored in one of the upper-floor offices. Marcus observed through his cameras as the intruders successfully bypassed the electronic locks and entered the target office. However, once inside, they found themselves unable to locate the documents they sought, as filing cabinets rearranged their contents and computer terminals refused to display the requested information. The spies became increasingly frustrated as their equipment malfunctioned and their carefully planned operation fell apart around them. Phones lost signal strength, laptop batteries drained inexplicably, and their flashlights dimmed without cause. When they finally abandoned their mission and attempted to leave, they found themselves lost in corridors they had navigated successfully just hours before, as if the building's layout had changed to confuse and disorient them. Marcus eventually guided the lost intruders to the exits, though he maintained the pretense that he had discovered them through routine patrol procedures. The incident strengthened his appreciation for Caldwell's protective presence and confirmed that the architect's concern for his building extended to defending it against serious threats. The ghostly partnership evolved to include more complex communications as Marcus became more attuned to the subtle methods Caldwell used to convey information. Patterns in elevator arrivals could indicate specific floors that required attention. Variations in temperature could signal the urgency of particular situations, and the timing of system anomalies could provide detailed instructions about appropriate responses. Marcus began documenting these communication methods in a private journal, creating a comprehensive guide to interpreting the building's supernatural language. The information would be valuable for future security personnel, though Marcus doubted that anyone would believe his explanations without experiencing the phenomena firsthand. The relationship with Caldwell's ghost had transformed Marcus's understanding of his profession. He no longer saw himself as simply a security guard, but as a caretaker responsible for maintaining the harmony between the living and the dead within the building's walls. The job had become more complex and meaningful than any position he'd held previously, requiring skills that weren't taught in any security training program. Marcus's reputation as an exceptionally competent security professional spread throughout the industry, leading to job offers from other prestigious buildings around the city. However, he declined these opportunities, recognizing that his success was inextricably linked to his partnership with Meridian Tower's supernatural guardian. Leaving would mean abandoning not only a unique working relationship, but also betraying the trust that had developed between himself and the building's ghostly architect. The building's tenants began reporting an unusual sense of safety and comfort while working in Meridian Tower. They attributed these feelings to the excellent security and maintenance standards, unaware that their well-being was being actively monitored and protected by forces beyond normal human perception. Employee satisfaction scores reached unprecedented levels, and the building's reputation as a premium business address continued to grow. Marcus understood that his role extended far beyond traditional security duties. He was serving as a bridge between the physical and spiritual aspects of the building, facilitating cooperation between the living occupants and the ghostly presence that watched over them all. The responsibility was both challenging and rewarding, requiring constant attention to subtle details and nuanced communications that most people would never notice. The success of the partnership with Caldwell's Ghost had practical benefits for building management as well. Maintenance costs decreased significantly as problems were identified and addressed before they could develop into major issues. The building's systems operated with remarkable efficiency, and tenant complaints became increasingly rare. Marcus's presence had somehow unlocked the building's full potential as both a commercial space and a supernatural ecosystem. As his third year at Meridian Tower approached, Marcus realized that he had found his true calling in this unusual position. The work combined all of his professional skills with challenges that pushed him to develop new abilities and perspectives. He was no longer just protecting a building from human threats, but serving as a guardian of the delicate balance between different forms of existence within the same space. The partnership with Caldwell had taught Marcus that death wasn't necessarily the end of responsibility or caring. The architect's continued presence in the building he had designed demonstrated a dedication that transcended physical limitations, inspiring Marcus to approach his own duties with similar commitment and attention to detail. Marcus's experience at Meridian Tower had revealed that the boundary between life and death was far more permeable than most people realized. Buildings, especially those created with great passion and skill, could retain the spiritual imprint of their creators long after those individuals had passed away. Understanding and respecting these connections could lead to remarkable partnerships between the living and the dead. The steady rain outside Meridian Tower continued to fall as Marcus completed another successful night of supernatural security work. The droplets on the windows reflecting the warm glow of the offices where living tenants and ghostly guardians maintained their eternal watch together. His story demonstrates that sometimes the most effective protection comes from sources we never expect to encounter, and that openness to impossible possibilities can lead to extraordinary professional relationships. Our third tale tonight brings us to a remote mountain cabin where a family's peaceful vacation transformed into an encounter with something that shouldn't exist in our rational world. The Henderson family had been planning their mountain retreat for months, carefully researching locations that would provide the perfect balance of scenic beauty and comfortable isolation. They found exactly what they were looking for in a rental cabin nestled high in the Colorado Rockies, surrounded by dense pine forests and accessible only by a winding dirt road that discouraged casual visitors. David and Maria Henderson packed their SUV with supplies for a week-long stay, excited to disconnect from their busy urban lives and spend quality time with their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, both 13 years old. The girls had initially protested the lack of internet connectivity at the cabin, but they gradually warmed to the idea of a true wilderness adventure away from the distractions of social media and homework. The cabin exceeded their expectations in every way, constructed from massive logs harvested from the surrounding forest. It featured a stone fireplace large enough to heat the entire main room, a wraparound porch with spectacular mountain views, and modern amenities that made their stay comfortable without compromising the rustic atmosphere. The isolation was complete. with no other structures visible in any direction, and no sounds except the wind through the pines and the occasional call of distant wildlife. Their first 3 days passed in perfect harmony with nature. They hiked forest trails that led to hidden waterfalls and pristine meadows, roasted marshmallows around evening campfires, and rediscovered the pleasure of extended family conversations without electronic interruptions. The girls embraced the outdoor activities with enthusiasm, and even their parents began to relax in ways they hadn't experienced in years. The change began on their 4th night, when David woke to the sound of footsteps on the cabin's wooden porch. He lay still in the darkness, listening carefully to determine if the sounds were caused by wind moving loose boards or settling timber. But the rhythm was too regular, too purposeful to be anything other than someone walking slowly around the perimeter of their shelter. Maria stirred beside him, her breathing shallow with tension. She had heard it too. David slipped quietly from the bed and moved to the window, peering through the curtains at the moonlit porch. The footsteps continued their circuit, but he could see no figure casting shadows on the weathered planks. The sounds moved from the front of the cabin to the sides, then around to the back, maintaining their steady pace despite the absence of any visible cause. The girls remained asleep in the loft bedroom above, their quiet breathing a comforting counterpoint to the mysterious sounds outside. David considered waking them to move everyone to the main room where they could stay together, but he didn't want to create panic over what might have a simple explanation. Mountain wildlife could be surprisingly large and heavy, and bears were known to investigate human habitations with methodical curiosity. But when David opened the front door to investigate, the footsteps stopped immediately. The porch was empty, showing no disturbance in the thin layer of pine needles that had accumulated in the corners. More troubling still, the wooden boards showed no signs of moisture from the heavy dew that had settled on everything else outside. Whatever had been walking there had left no physical trace of its presence. Maria joined him at the doorway, wrapping her robe tightly against the mountain chill. They stood together in silence, listening to the normal night sounds of the forest. Owls called from distant trees, branches creaked in the gentle breeze, and small animals rustled through the underbrush. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary, yet both of them felt an underlying tension that suggested they were being observed from the darkness beyond their porch light's reach. They returned to bed, but found sleep elusive. Every small sound seemed amplified in the quiet cabin, and both David and Maria found themselves straining to distinguish between normal settling noises and the possibility of those footsteps returning. When morning arrived, they decided not to mention the incident to Emma and Sophie, hoping to preserve their daughter's enjoyment of the vacation. The 5th day brought subtle changes that were difficult to define, but impossible to ignore. The forest around the cabin felt different somehow, more watchful and attentive than before. Conversations seemed to carry farther than they should, as if the trees themselves were listening. Even during bright daylight hours, shadows appeared deeper and more substantial, creating pockets of darkness that seemed to move independently of the sun's position. Emma was the first to voice what they were all beginning to feel. During their afternoon hike to a nearby lake, she stopped suddenly on the trail and looked back toward the cabin. "Does anyone else feel like something's following us?" she asked, her usual teenage confidence replaced by genuine unease. The family stopped and listened, but heard only the normal sounds of wind and wildlife that had accompanied all their previous excursions. Sophie nodded in agreement with her sister's observation. "It's like when you know someone's watching you at school, but when you turn around, no one's there." The girls had inherited their parents' intuitive sensitivity, and their shared discomfort confirmed that the family's growing unease wasn't simply imagination or vacation stress. David suggested they return to the cabin earlier than planned, though he framed the decision as a desire to prepare a special dinner, rather than admitting his own concerns about the forest's changed atmosphere. As they walked back along the familiar trail, all four family members found themselves glancing frequently over their shoulders and moving closer together than their usual hiking formation required. Thank you for joining me tonight for another collection of unsettling tales designed to guide you gently into peaceful sleep. As the rain continues to fall outside your window, let these stories of transformed realities, supernatural partnerships, and mysterious encounters remind you that the world holds far more mysteries than we often dare to acknowledge. Rest well, knowing that sometimes the most extraordinary experiences await us in the most ordinary places. Sweet dreams, and until next time, may your sleep be filled with wonder rather than worry.